Welcome to everybody. We're just going to give a couple minutes for everyone to be able to make it. So we'll probably start about 2 after the hour. We'll be getting started shortly. All right, we're going to kick things off. So I hope everyone is here for the CircleCI for Platform Teams demo. If not, this is your off-ramp. We'll get to some introductions. So I'll let my co-host Brian introduce himself first.
Okay, thanks very much, Ryan. So hi, everyone. So I'm Brian O'Halloran. I'm a senior solutions engineer with CircleCI. So I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and I'm with the company for about 4 years now almost. And my career here has spanned both the post and pre-sales side of things. So currently I help prospective CircleCI customers with evaluating the product, and I help our existing customers to expand their CircleCI footprint within their companies. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all today about our product's best practices for platform teams. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Brian. So as Brian introduced himself, he is on the EMEA team. I've worked with EMEA. I work for North America, so I actually manage a team of solution engineers in North America region. Previously was a solutions engineer on Brian's team. And I've been here about 3.5 years and really looking forward to giving the presentation today and to going a bit deeper into platform teams and using CircleCI. And in terms of the agenda, just want to set the stage here. So we're going to have almost like 2 different agendas and a sub one. So we're going to start off with just some CircleCI basics. So the one-on-one, I assume a decent amount or a good level of familiarity with CircleCI, but we'll only take a couple minutes just to level set and make sure we're all on the same page in terms of like the terminology we're going to use and what we can expect to see. Beyond that, we're going to have a sub agenda. So this is going to answer how can developers move fast and stay in the guardrails, how can we get deployment out on their first day. It's really a day in the life of a platform team leader. And then we're going to have Q&A. So there's going to be plenty of time at the end for that. There's a Q&A function inside of the chat. Looks like there is actually already a question. So good use of that. Please do. We will be covering OIDC, not specifically AWS, but we can go into that at the end and answer questions you have there. So OIDC definitely will be on the agenda. All right, so let's start with the basics. I want to start this off with the important concept of config as code. Everything we're going to see is defined in the config file. In terms of the important terms and how they relate, let's go ahead and define those. The highest level is a pipeline. So when we're saying pipeline, you can think of it as all the workflows triggered on your project with the relevant parameters. And really, you could think of it as your config itself, the relevant context from the trigger, the body of work needed to validate. And the workflows, they coordinate a set of related work from start to finish. It's the orchestration of jobs. So which job is running and in which order. A job is a collection of steps run in the execution environment that you specify. And a step's a small segment of work, just a command run during a job. So again, all this is defined in the config file itself. You might be happy because you love config as code, but you might also be worried and want to look for a way to apply some guardrails. Config policy management is a great way to config policies are a great way to enforce org and project-wide policies on configurations. And it allows administrators and operators to write and manage rules, and it can either block processing or you can allow things and just log usage for different violations. And then some flexibility with those guardrails attached. So that each job is defined in the config file, and a job is a collection of steps in an execution environment. And with CircleCI, there are a lot of options for you to choose from here in terms of environments. You can choose from our cloud environments, and Brian's going to go into this, but it could be Docker, Mac, Windows, VM, custom hosted runner. And then you can also see a workflow using all of these together on the left. On top of that, for our cloud resources, we have a large variety of resource classes available. See our example Docker executor resources on the right. So they can be anywhere from 20 CPU, 40 gigs of RAM, all the way down to 1 CPU, 2 gigs of RAM. So it really lets you find your perfect Goldilocks zone. I want to quickly talk about the config files. So let me talk about the UI, or beyond that. And let me pull one over and just make sure we're all navigating. Sorry, trying to pull the UI over here. So right here, we are in the, sorry, my pug in the background, if he makes noise. I just want to show you this, the UI here. So right now, this is where the operator gets a bird's eye view of what's going on across the org. I can filter by project, by branch, by a slew of status updates and things going on. And then inside you see here, so these are all pipelines kicked off, and then inside there's a workflow, so which job is running and in which order. And it could be multiple workflows in it. Inside of the workflow, we see large amount of vertical scale available on the pipelines as well. So these can all run for a big team. Thousands of workflows can be running at the same time. There's no managing the infrastructure there. Inside this, you can see it's really the steps run inside of an execution environment. So now we're looking at a job, again, all independent ephemeral environments, spun up on demand, torn down after. So no reusing configuration ever. And with that, I am actually going to jump back over to the slides and do the sub agenda here. So now that we've covered that, here's what we're going to touch on during the story aspect. A day in the life. How can a brand new dev team automate onboarding a project and to get deployment out inside of a day? So we're going to start at a really high level and start whittling this down. So environment support, reusable configuration, the guardrails that we can apply. So secure credentials, config policies. Brian's going to go over automating a project with Backstage, and then we're going to also talk about once a project's onboarded, how can we do things to optimize and make things go quicker? So reducing tickets, understanding what's going on across the org and at the project level. And again, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So with all that, I will hand it over to Brian.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So let me just share my screen. And hopefully you can all see my screen okay. So as platform leaders, there are always concerns around ensuring that the appropriate environments are available to run our pipelines, and that the time and resources are not being wasted in building and maintaining these environments. So ideally, we want to default to cloud environments to ensure that where we are running our pipelines is evergreen and seamless to the developer. However, there may be specific use cases where we need to self-host the runner layer, and access to this layer needs to be quick and simple. So as such, CircleCI allows platform teams to be able to support whichever needs arise. So I'm just going to go into my IDE here, and it shows you a sample project. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. So if we look at the execution environment definition here, okay, by switching a single line of code like so, you can control the vertical scale for the resource. So I've switched this to a larger resource. And if I go back, but I can also make another simple change like so to basically control the environment the job is run in. So we're running in Docker at the moment. I'm going to switch this to our Linux machine executor. Make that lowercase I and move it in a bit. So we have support for Docker, as you've seen. We have support for the Linux machine executor, which I've just changed to here. We have also support for Windows Server. We have support for both Mac OS, Intel, and Silicon. And we have support for ARM architecture as well. So all this is available at your fingertips with a simple key line of code change like I've just shown you. So let's say I revert that again. So let's say within your pipeline, your workflow has jobs that run in the cloud, but you also have some work you need to do on your own hardware. So within your workflow, we support the ability for you to run hybrid work like so. So I'm just going to make another change here. And here, I have switched over to one of our container runners. So I'm just going to come out of this. And here you can see how any of the runners that you have set up, self-hosted ones, you can see within your org what ones are there in a list like this. In this case, we just have one for demo purposes, but if you have multiple ones set up across multiple environments, these will all be listed here. And so basically, we're removing the need for you to manage and update infrastructure and instead focus on enabling teams to achieve higher velocity. And because we have such a wide breadth of resources to choose from, you also know that you are going to be able to support the business needs that come up. So in summary, how does this help a developer build within the day? Because we can support anything that gets thrown our way, we don't need to spend time provisioning and patching infrastructure before you can get a project up and running. Okay, so another common concern regarding developer efficiency that CircleCI also addresses is our ability to standardize config logic across the org for all devs, both old ones and new ones, to adhere to our best practices. So the concept of reusable configuration is shown here. Go back to this. I'll just make it a bit bigger again. Oops. Sorry. So here we have our reusable commands defined here to use service account and enable OIDC. And the logic is here in the config so that we can apply this across multiple jobs. So you're going to see enable OIDC here as an example. But what if we want to apply this more broadly across the org? So we can create a private orb with a step referenced here within the job, and with the private orb defined up here that's tied to one of our internal orgs. And this encapsulates the logic that we've set up. So this is great because developers don't need to worry about org standards and best practices. They can just insert a line of code that encapsulates everything. So I'm just going to go back to the deck here. So in summary, again, how does this help a developer build within a day? Because all the logic is already built out and accessible, there's no time that needs to go into reinventing how to do things in the right way. This is useful for every type of job or command. And with that, I will pass it back to Ryan again. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Brian. So now we talked a lot about flexibility and things we can do to be very broad. And I want to start applying some guardrails. Right. The first thing we're going to do in this situation, I'm a platform leader, and I want to find a holistic way to implement a policy across the org for credentials and access to systems. I know that I need to be prepared to grow. I need to plan ahead, and I don't have to think about the static credentials. So how do I find a way to keep DevSecOps or auditors happy? So the first step in applying a policy is with context. Contexts are a global group of credentials you can apply to the org. This is where the understanding of some of the systems available, I can start breaking these up logically. So we can see some examples here. I have some for our reference architecture. I see one I have for Compass. I have another one down here I'm going to end up using for Honeycomb, as well as like some platform specific ones. Those platform specific ones, those can actually be really cool for using things like take an action or namespace for things like orbs and runners, which Brian mentioned. So these are all global, but I can get a bit deeper. I can start adding in some restrictions. I can restrict these by project, for instance. So if I only want some of these applied somewhere, good example is actually if I have that repo for an orb and I want these CircleCI specific credentials available only there. And if you want to be hands-off, you can leave it at that. But at scale, I think there are going to be some more things that I really want to do. And this is where contexts get really powerful. So you have a context, you also have an OIDC token that you can use for whichever secrets manager or service that you have set up. This implements short-lived credentials instead of static secrets. The OIDC claim also has some additional fields you might want to make use of. So if I want to limit role access based on project or by branch with the provider level. So I know there's some questions around AWS, and I can get into that kind of during the Q&A. But really, if you want to restrict branches in this way, it's a really powerful way to plan for security. This is how we see a lot of people doing this at scale. I'm going to show you an example too. So of a Docker job that I have going. This is a workflow that we're going to be working with. So I have to run some linting, some testing, building an image, deploying to dev, and run end to end. So on this, when I'm going to build a Docker image, I'm using an external Vault instance for my credential management. I'm authenticating with OIDC here. And with this, I'm able to let our external Nexus instance that we're using for registry know it's us. It's the same process for the next job where I'm deploying to my dev cluster. I'm getting credentials from Vault, and I'm updating the EKS cluster. Another option would be to set up role assumption with CircleCI as a provider in AWS. And the orb actually for CircleCI has that option to toggle that. So if you want to do AWS role assumption, not static credentials, that's built in the AWS CLI orb. So that would be a great way to go about partnering with AWS to get that out. And there are a lot of ways to set things up. I talked about Vault, AWS orbs. There isn't necessarily a right approach, just the right approach for you. It's a really good opportunity to work with our team on assessing security posture and really building for the future. We do this all the time. We love finding the right approach with folks. And then on another note, you can mandate usage for whichever approach you want. So Brian talked about like that Vault access without private orb. You can use config policies for this. And that's also going to be a teaser for what's about to come next. We have some helpers for context and orbs as well. Well, let me get back into this really quickly. Sorry about that. Sorry, y'all got logged out here. And here we go. Okay, so what did we just see? We take a logical global grouping of credentials and start narrowing down the scope until we meet the level of adherence that we need and we may want to mandate. We're able to restrict by project and then use OIDC to interact with our secrets manager. Then we can also make use of claims information to gate things by like branch. For you, this means you have a policy that makes sense and the guardrails in place, so no update gets beyond where it should. You don't need to get in the weeds managing credentials for hundreds of repos either. Set up a provider, off to the races. And then in our next situation, before we get to that, I guess how does this help you as a platform leader have a dev team be able to deploy in a day? So dev teams, for them, they're able to get builds out without needing to configure credentials or find the right way to access resources. So setting the stage here. In this situation, I want to add some further guardrails. More specifically, I want to make sure the best practices that we've set up are actually followed. And we want also developers to feel like they can make changes without breaking something or doing something bad. We also want control over how broadly something is applied. So the ability to make customizations that fit our internal policies. No, there's already a question on this in the Q&A. So how do we do this? I'm actually going to switch roles here for a second, and I'm going to be a developer. So I have two apps here. I have a dev cluster you can see here, and then I have a production cluster out here that I'm using. And I'm working on the dev cluster. It's my first week. I'm trying to make an impact. I want to get something out to production. So I try to get production access on a non-main branch, and I tested the change. I know there are no issues. I promise it's okay. But this separation of concerns, this is something that DevSecOps mandates. And in this case, we can see here that the policy violation gets picked up and the pipeline itself doesn't even process. And because it violates the policy, it doesn't process at all. So config policies lets you enforce your policies across the config files of the organization and allows developers to be empowered to own their own configs and pipelines. And DevSecOps and platform teams, they both know there aren't any security or policy adherence issues. In our case, it means developer can feel like they can make changes without hesitation. And they don't have to be in the weeds of the rules they need to track down. You might also have hundreds of repos and you want a holistic approach without having to treat them all as separate entities. So here you can have cohesion within org-wide policy. Then you can pick and choose other projects for other policies that you like. It's here to fit in with whatever makes sense for you. These are all config as code. They're all written in Rego. But the developers don't have to go into that. They can also just run into the policies in the org as well, and it makes sense. So if they see they got a violation block and they want to know what's going on without having to go to the source code, it's really easy to follow. You don't have to go to that central repo. So we're going to jump into some examples you can make use of, but I want to come back to the types of failures. And again, I know there's a question on this. So we have hard enforcement. We saw that at the top. This stops a pipeline itself from being processed. These are good for critical security and governance. And then we have soft enforcement. Doesn't stop the pipeline, but it does audit log the violation. These are good for things that you want to monitor. So you can think orb usage, understanding resource usage, or confirming base images are consistent. So here you can see even at the rule level, that's where these are applied. So they don't need to be at an org or a kind of a project level. This is at the rule, like, do you want to enforce the rule itself in a hard or soft manner? All right, so let's jump into some examples and we'll talk about some good starting points. In terms of use cases, we have some built out here that you can use, and this is where I would probably start if I was in your shoes. And you can think of these in terms pretty simply of just keeping things out or making sure things are in. The environment one, so I talked about Docker resources, the base image that you're using. These are really good for soft enforcement examples. So if someone really wants to use a really large resource class, you want to trust them to make the right call, but you also want to follow up to make sure that it's right. We'll have an example that kind of goes into that a little bit. And if you want to use a base image outside of the ones that you have provided, it'd be good to understand why. See if you're maybe actually missing something in the base image that maybe you didn't realize. Or make it easier, you can also use the pipeline metadata we have available, so utility helpers for the data, to make your own. Now, some examples where you might want to block processing if there's a violation. You might want to mandate certain orbs are present. So think using a static analysis orb or a static analysis job before getting out to production. If you want to lock down certain groups of credentials for certain branches, ensuring the things that you need to get checked off all get done. Cool. So what did we just see? Config policies, these are platform team's best friend. We start out by talking through, at the top of this, all the options, the flexibility. And this now allows you to rest assured that all your standards are being followed and you can lock down whatever you need to in a config without having to comb through everything. Ultimately, with all these set up and enforced, you can feel free to take out the manual intervention and guardrails that you currently have. You can ensure governance, increase throughput, and you can also soft launch things, understand usage with the soft failures and audit logs. It's really powerful. And for end user being able to deploy on the first day, the teams can rest assured they aren't breaking any rules or worrying about doing something wrong, because there are policies to ensure all of these guardrails that we have set and ensure they're adhered to. You can just go ahead and start building. Cool. And with that, we're going to pass it over to Brian to really tie this all together.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. So I'll just share my screen again. Okay. So another challenge that platform leaders face is around providing one source of truth for developers to get everything that they need to do their job, whether it be code documentation to the ability to order a new laptop. So this will increase their efficiency, as having everything at their fingertips allows them to concentrate on doing their job rather than having to waste time searching through multiple locations for information, or equally being overloaded with process. But what if I want to enable my teams to self-serve on board a project with best practices already baked in and can integrate that functionality into the existing company portal? Watch on. So if I switch here, you will see a simple integration that we have with Backstage. And this integration allows you to automate the creation of a project with all the best practices in place while using a custom action to trigger the CircleCI API to start building that project. And you'll be able to see that project running within the UI. So if I go ahead and do that, we'll call this Brian Platform Demo Tune 1. Copy. Next step. So here we're going to be using this integration to create the repository with our configuration as code within our GitHub repo. So in this case, the org is one of our internal ones. And we'll give the repo the same name as what I showed earlier on. And click on next step. So I'm going to create the create button. Okay. So if I click on repository, this shows you what we created. So you can see that this is structured accordingly within the config file, where you can see the workflow orchestration here with a node test job set up here to run using our node orb, which is defined up here. And you have a Docker build job as well here. And we also have branch filtering in place down here to only allow this deploy job to run if we were running this on our main branch, your default branch, which is main in this case. But you'll also notice we're using contexts here as well, defined within the build job. So with one click of a button, you have a project that adheres to our governance standards with config policies using our private orb that we manage. So this one up here, which does the load credentials here. And this will allow the credentials to be accessed in Vault using OIDC. So if I then go into pipelines here, you can see 1 minute ago, this is kicked off. And here are our 2 jobs here. And this one. Perfect. So coming back here. So again, in summary, how does this help a developer get a deployment out within a day? So the entire process of onboarding and configuring a project that follows the rules, or what we would call the gold standard, is totally streamlined with the click of one button. So you can be up and running and building within minutes. So moving on. So again, high on the wish list of platform leaders, as the team is running throughout this, is to help remove the roadblocks for developers around long feedback loops and streamlining the problem resolution process. So devs want instant feedback and don't want to have to raise a ticket to get a build failure looked at by a colleague, say on the SRE team or ops team. So ideally, they wish to do this from themselves. And with our VS Code extension, which I showed you earlier, this feedback is even quicker and easier. So if I go back in now, and again, I'll make this full. It's pretty big in size here. So I'm back in my IDE as a developer, and this is my command center. And in all honesty, this is really where I spend all my time. So I have just fixed up an issue here. So we'll say, had a failure here, scaffold build push, and I would have fixed it up. And I now that we're adhering to all our company policies, we want to start running checks on the actual source code, right? So if you think of our CircleCI Insights page and, the pipelines I showed you there a few minutes ago, which showed all the pipelines within our internal org, you could say that an operator has a single pane of glass to review the health of our pipelines across the org. But for me as a developer, like I might need all of that. I'm just working on what's in my ID. I'm not too concerned what other teams are doing. So you can see here on the left that the pipelines are running where I live, and I don't need to navigate to a UI or a different interface. So, developers are always going to want green builds all the time. That's the happy path. But in reality, things sometimes don't go according to plan. So if I go back to this failure here, okay, I can see that, I want to see the job details here. Like I've going into the, look at this failure. The name of the game here, once I see this failure, is really reducing the mean time to recovery. So the first line of defense is here in the IDE, where I just have all the info that I need at my fingertips. So I don't want to jump back and forth to troubleshoot. I just want to figure things out as quick as possible. So if I was to click on, let's just get anything here, job details. So I can open up the job details here, and you can see the entire job view here. And that includes all the exit codes and all the logs. Okay, so you can see here a failure, or you can see here success. So I'll just move this down a bit and come back. So here is a case where, this is all great for me as a developer, where I'm focused on getting my changes, and I really want to get the feedback I need without any kind of context switch. And that's the name of the game, to increase efficiency here. So everything's right here for you. But what if I want to do further troubleshooting? So I've rerun this job at SSH. I just clicked on it there a minute ago just to save time here. And I can rerun this job, as I said, with SSH enabled. So let's say I want to go into my execution environment, like into the Docker container itself. And I want to see what's going on, maybe with environment variables, or I want to check paths to see if I put an incorrect path or something like that, or just do general troubleshooting, I can do it. So if I just click on, or if I type in yes here, I'm in. So this is quick and easy. You get right in, it opens up the terminal right here for you to do that. So I'm just going to exit out of this. It'll ask me, do I want to cancel the corresponding job, which is yes. And exit out again. So all of these options let me, the developer, fix the failure as quickly as possible. And who doesn't want that? So in summary, again, how does this help with the common theme of helping developers get a deployment out in a day? This is also continuing the theme of developers being able to do things on their own and not hitting bottlenecks. They have all the tools they need to get fixes out right away. And with that, I will pass you back to Ryan.
Thanks, Brian. All right, this is a little bit sneaky because it doesn't really answer the question as much as getting a deployment out in a day. But we're going to talk about some metrics. So once things are humming, like how do we start making sure things keep going smoothly and no changes need to be made? So talk about metrics. In the first situation, let's talk about insights. So we've talked about everything thus far, from config all the way to deployment, guardrails, automating the onboarding. Now we're going to move to making sense of things beyond a single run. The Insights Dash, it's the de facto place to see it all. So it helps platform teams see what's going on across the board and really see trends over time. I'm going to jump in here. So right now I'm at the organization level, and I can start seeing things around cost control and visibility. So credit usage trends, average duration, success rates. These are great if you do have organizational goals that you want to and are tasked with monitoring. We see a lot of teams focused on door metrics or metrics in a similar vein. We can also see the projects and workflows down here at the bottom, with their trends. So I'm going to go a level deeper here. I'm going to jump into this project, the Bank of Ion that we just saw in the main workflow. So that was the predominant workflow that we've been covering. I selecting all branches, but I can also filter by branch and date. I start to see those things we just saw. So run, success rate, duration, credit usage spend. I can start to see visibility into the big things here. This is where I start looking for outliers. But jumping back to the top now, jumping over to jobs. This is the same type of metric, so duration, success rate, really, but at the job level. So I'm like taking those kind of those Dora things and I'm starting to narrow that down a little bit. This is also a really great way to get visibility into how you're using the resources provisioned. I can see the resources available here. So across the different runs that we've had and the trends. So really just like, how am I using this? So it also helps you manage costs. It's really visible if you're either underutilizing or overutilizing resources for pieces of work. I want to make sure I have the right size environment for the right job and find that Goldilocks zone and not make unnecessary trade-off between speed and spend. So here in this Java check style job or Python check style, see, maybe this is actually getting more vertical scale than it needs. So maybe in this case, I can reduce the resource class I'm provisioning and provide more for another intensive piece of work. A little breadcrumb for a second. It's another great opportunity to also work with our support and consulting teams to take this approach. And then the test tab. So these are some of my favorites. I can see the test results for workflows, including passing and failing. And it also starts to bring some things to my attention. So things that are really useful to know: flaky tests, most failed tests, slowest tests. Overall, these are just things that I could actually use and take action on to really optimize the speed. And the last thing I want to touch on here is that this is all front and center, and these are the types of things that we know are broadly applicable. But all this information is also accessible with the API. We have an Insights API endpoint. You can get whatever you need, which really just a few calls. So why does that matter? It lets you get visibility into organization-wide metrics, achieve excellence, and really you can use timing and resource utilization insights to make sense of where things might, where might be bottlenecks and high leverage things that you can do to increase throughput. And then let's move on a little bit. So we talked there about insights. So getting things in, but extensibility. So maybe you also want to get information out and feed things into another system that you already use. So extensibility, it's huge at any organization at scale. We have the high performing teams want to seamlessly incorporate the best of breed tools together. Platform teams want to ensure flexibility and scalability. So in this situation, I'm a leader responsible for org metrics, and I'm actually using Honeycomb for visibility. So I come in here into Honeycomb and I see some builds that I've been running. This is a build for a fresh project. So something that like Brian just onboarded, a new team is getting something on, and it's actually taken a while after they've made some changes. So some of these jobs seem to be an outlier. There's a couple ways I can look at this. So I'm going to pull a couple of these up. I can see here that, this has taken a long time for this build, longer than it should. And I want to use bubble up, but I want to jump in here, start making a little more sense of what's going on. So I can see these are where the changes are. And I'm going to copy this and go take a look at these builds. Cool. So let me jump in here. The workflow, this is the build that's taken a long time, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I can see the CPU is actually maxing out. It's really maxing out the resources available. So this is actually a good opportunity to identify a way to make use of what Brian talked about earlier in updating CPU and RAM available with a single quick change. Really the flip side, that last Python check style job, I said there's underutilizing resources. This one we can add more. And this would be a good example of something that comes, you might flag this with, you might add it to a whitelist of larger resources if you have a soft audit log fail for config policies to ensure everyone's using a consistent amount. Like you've looked into here and you want to optimize this time. This is a good example of one you can actually upgrade. And all this is because I was able to really consume data where I was already working in my observability tool. All right, so the next question is, how did I go about doing that? So in this case, I'm actually just using the Honeycomb org. it's already built out by Honeycomb to send build events, and I just added it to my config. And the orbs are great for this type of stuff, but we definitely have a few ways to, to get info both with or without them. As I mentioned, we also have a fully fledged API available. So if you want to get information about users, parts of your pipelines, rotate manage secrets, do something with insights, trigger work, run schedule pipelines, really you're in good company. We see it all the time. That can be used to get information to monitoring observability tools like we just saw, custom insights dashboards, access artifacts after the fact, really you name it. And the CircleCI also has the option to set up webhooks. So webhooks, they can be set up at the project level and sent out for when a workflow or job ends, and commonly we'll see like a terminal state, so success and failed. Examples of ways to use them. So getting data to incident management tools like PagerDuty, triggering notifications to people about completion of work. So something like a Slack channel to notify. If you want to plug in any custom tools, webhooks are great. I have an example here of using Atlassian Compass webhook to see deployment statuses over in Atlassian where I'm consuming that sort of data. And we also have further examples here and ways to go about it. So you can see, we have the Honeycomb one, we have New Relic, Datadog, Sumo Logic, really just customize here, do what you want to do. So what did we just cover? Get information out in a way that makes sense for us. CircleCI is an integral part of the ecosystem that you have built out, and we have pre-built integrations to help with all of this as well. And that was it for the prepared info. And we already have a few questions in the Q&A, so maybe we'll get to that, and then we have some bonus content as well. So I had one question about network bandwidth and what level that would be applied per pipeline or per workflow or per job or per step. We're talking about network bandwidth. Could you maybe follow up and elaborate specifically what you're looking for? And the same thing, I see another question around securing a context environment from like base 64 and env. Is that like if you have to like put in a file, for instance? So maybe you can chime in there. If so, you'd be able to add a file as an environment variable as well. So just an extra step on that, but you can have the you could run that. So let me know if there's something that we might be missing there, if you don't mind following up. And then filtering by tags. So I think that came during the insights piece. Right now, there's no way to do by tags. You could do that with the insights API. But if you want to follow up afterwards and maybe let us know your use case, that could be a good one to capture. But in terms of like filtering by tags, it does come up in the pipelines page. All right. So while I'm getting a couple of those clarifications, and any of the ones I answered, please chime in if you want me to go deeper into it. I will pass it over to Brian to share a little bit more about some fail fast.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let me just share my screen again. Let's expand it fully. Sorry. Okay. So among the biggest challenges for developers is a lengthy feedback loops for validating their test suite, and especially both the identification of flaky tests as well as proving the success of change. So having to sit through a long-running test suite each time an improvement is made is an inefficient and costly use of developer time. So overcoming this is top of mind for both developers and platform leaders alike. And now you can with CircleCI's new rerun only fail test feature. So you can mitigate with that. So this is in preview at the moment. So I'm just here looking at our pipelines page. I'm just, looking at one of the branches of one of my colleagues knit in here. So to quickly show you this, if we go into the Python test job here, you can see that this is a suite with 17 tests in it. One has failed and 16 have passed, but it's a very, very quick suite. However, as well as just having the normal rerun workflow from failed or rerun job with SSH options, we now have this rerun failed tests only. So if I click on that, it's going to run away, as you can see. So here there's a bit of a before and after, like this took 49 seconds previously. And a rerun, which I did earlier on, took only 45 seconds because only the first test, which failed, was rerun. So this does exactly what it says on the tin. You've got your failed tests, you can implement a fix, and you can only run the said failed tests and not your whole suite. So this allows you to fix issues as quick as possible and helps you reduce mean time to recovery. All right, thank you very much. Just stop sharing.
Cool. And then I'm going to jump over and talk about one more fun use case really quickly that I want to hit on. Okay. And this one's around doing infras code. So there are other ways to use CircleCI. And there's another follow-up question that ties into this. So everything we've seen thus far follows a pipeline kicking off a workflow. A workflow runs and ends with the pipeline. If we have a situation where we want to run some additional logic based on something like path changes for monorepo or based on checks in their environment or different configs based on the situation, it's helpful to not have all my pipeline parameters set at runtime. This is a perfect case for a dynamic config. So it's functionality opened up by continuation API endpoint. Instead of having one workflow, we have multiple. So we have a setup workflow, runs setup checks. Run setup checks, and then a continuation workflow that does some work. And this is good for a few use cases. One's for a monorepo. So if you want to do path filtering, we have an orb for that. So that's great. That's easy. So if you want to run conditional work testing based on path changes until you get out to like main or staging, perfect, absolutely optimized there. But this one is for we're using CircleCI for also building and managing infrastructure. You can see here, we're spinning up and tearing down clusters in EKS based on branch patterns and some additional parameters so we can provide to tear things down. So it's really important for platform teams that want to manage their infra's code using CircleCI and some of this logic. So we have this built out here to run for some checks and then a continuation config using the Terraform orb and a couple parameters to actually spin these things up. So really fun stuff that we're doing. So you can really automate part of your workflow with configuration as code and the guardrails. And there was another question on policies and break if we were to have config policies on the on continuation workflow. So I'll just show you that too. So here you can see if we're building it from scratch, it will still fail the continuation workflow that is passed in, and that one that's built if it does violate a policy as well. So you can have that guardrail as well once that thing is passed in. So it's not going to be a trick and to skip through. You can rest assured that it's going to be stopped. And then on this one, we actually had you can see we had a manual hold here. I know there was also a question probably best suited for Brian around with config policies. Is there any use for like an approval hold job anymore? So I'll let Brian go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, I mean, approval hold jobs still serve some specific use case in CircleCI, despite what you spoke about config policies and the use of that one. So let's say, for example, you use approval hold jobs to do code reviews to be carried out prior to a deployment. Like that would still be valid. And if your company mandated that you had to have a separation of duties model within your pipeline to satisfy audit and compliance requirements, then yes, you would still use whole jobs there. But beyond these kind of regulatory type reasons, we would generally say most high performing teams would work using features like config policies to remove all the manual approval steps. So if you've already implemented good testing and security practices, like the ones which we've gone over throughout this webinar, then a good change should be able to make it all the way out and not be stopped for any kind of red tape type reasons. So this will increase the velocity and the deployment frequency. So yes and no is the simple answer. But a good question.
Yeah. And I love that too. Like, I think I love seeing when someone has set up these policies. We work really closely with people, and to see them, if nothing breaks, if the testing is good, nothing. It's really cool to hear people talk about this, or some of the really velocity teams we work with. And then I want to note, we were planning on following up with some some files and things that we're using. So we have the custom action that hits the follow for the CircleCI API endpoint. We have a V1 API for this. But let us know if you're using Backstage, you're automating some of these things, and you want to see some other things, and you want to collaborate a bit. We'd love to get feedback on what else you're using. I know there's also a plugin in terms of like insights data as well for Backstage that we didn't show, but the community runs this. So let us know if you're using that. All these types of things. And then I know there was a question with OIDC with AWS. And I guess we could take a couple minutes to run into that as well. So the orbs. This one runs role assumption here. So there's a command to actually run the assume role with web identity. So use the CircleCI OIDC token there if the context is present. So a really good thing to do, and you can also mandate this with the config policies. So really fun way to go about that. And then the provider again with down here, plenty of instructions in terms of like setting up AWS. And then if you also want to use a base image from AWS and ECR and use OIDC to pull that base image, we can also have an option to be able to do that. So really good partnership with AWS and to be able to fit natively. So let us know. We've got a few more minutes for any other questions, or if there are any clarifications on the questions that we were looking for follow-up on. I think there was the base 64 question, and then that one we're still kind of waiting on. Something else I really like about one of the things that Brian mentioned around environment support is that you don't need to have multiple tools. Like you don't need to use like a mobile specific, CI/CD. You have different metrics you're monitoring there. We have like the Android nested virtualization support, the M1 support, M2 coming up. Like all that stuff is really built in, Docker, self-hosted, like all this stuff like in a cohesive platform. So it's really been really nice. All right, well, I think that's about it. We'll follow, get the recording, get the slides over. Let us know what questions you have. Are you going to, work together, get feedback? We'd love to partner on this type of thing, get feedback from y'all. If there's something else, you think is important, you want to see, be happy to do a follow-up session, follow-up webinar, who knows? All right, well, thanks y'all.
Thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy
Today.
the rest of the day. See you all.